Pregnant wife thought the vacation was a gift, but the millionaire left her stranded with nothing. From the outside, looking in, Clarissa and Donovan seemed like the perfect couple, young, successful, and madly in love. When Donovan whisked his pregnant wife away on a lavish vacation, everyone believed it was yet another token of his limitless devotion. But behind the sweet smiles and honeymoon snapshots lay secrets darker than anyone could imagine. Clarissa, blissfully unaware, believed this holiday was a chance to reconnect before their baby's arrival. Little did she know, Donovan had far darker intentions. In a shocking twist, he would leave her stranded with nothing, and the road to redemption would be paved with heartbreak, betrayal, and an unexpected dose of karma. Clarissa Carlson was 26 when she first met Donovan Blackwood at a charity gala in downtown Chicago. It was a crisp October evening, and she still remembered the clang of champagne glasses echoing against the marble walls of the venue. The event was held at the famous Field Museum, an extravagant soiree that drew in millionaires, politicians, and celebrities. Dressed in a deep blue gown that hugged her slender figure, Clarissa had felt slightly out of place. A recent college graduate, without the money or status most of the attendees flaunted. She had gone merely to accompany her friend, who worked for the non-profit hosting the fundraiser. Clarissa was certain no one of consequence would even spare her a glance. Then, in that swirl of tuxedos and cocktail dresses, Donovan appeared like a gravitational force. Tall, lean, with hair the color of polished ebony and a commanding gaze that felt like it could see straight through her, Donovan captured her attention instantly. He introduced himself with a confident smile that straddled the line between charming and predatory. There was something about him that spelled out both wealth and power. He offered to get her a fresh glass of champagne, and from there, conversation flowed as easily as the sparkling liquid in their glasses. Clarissa's heart fluttered when he showered her with compliments, praising her beauty, her intelligence, and even the subtle way she seemed untainted by the superficial crowd. At first, she blushed and laughed, attributing his flattery to the usual lines wealthy men recited to naive women in such circles. But Donovan persisted. By the end of the evening, Clarissa found herself enthralled. It felt surreal, like she had accidentally wandered into a world where princes still existed, and she, unwittingly, had become Cinderella. Looking back, she sometimes suspected Donovan sensed her vulnerability from the start. She had grown up in modest means. Her father was a retired schoolteacher, her mother a homemaker. She had student loans, no family inheritance, and, at that time, only a few hundreds of dollars in her bank account. She was not the type of woman Donovan, who was rumored to invest millions in luxury hotels, would typically pursue. Yet he did. And soon, dinner dates at the city's finest restaurants became routine. Donovan introduced her to the world of private clubs and penthouse parties at the top floors of glass skyscrapers overlooking the shining lights of Chicago. In those first blissful months, Clarissa was thoroughly convinced that she had found the one. After all, how many men were so thoughtful, so generous, so completely intoxicating? Donovan spoiled her with lavish attention. Weekly bouquets of flowers replaced the single rose in a cheap vase she had kept in her shoebox apartment. He even arranged for her to attend events at the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago, a place she had only ever seen from the street. When Valentine's Day rolled around, a new sports car greeted her in the parking lot, her name emblazoned on a note pinned under the windshield wiper in Donovan's flamboyant handwriting. For my queen. She thought she was living a fairy tale, but behind every fairy tale lurked a shadow, and the illusions Donovan spun would prove to be only the surface of an unthinkable reality. Clarissa's childhood dreams had been humble, a cozy home, a loving family, and perhaps a job that allowed her to give back to others. She was compassionate to a fault, often volunteering at local shelters. For her, the measure of true success was simple kindness, warmth, and real human connection. Donovan, on the other hand, had an unquenchable thirst for winning. Raised by a father who was a real estate mogul, Donovan had spent his life acquiring success and never looking back. There was something in his eyes that spoke of restlessness, a desire to devour everything within reach. In their early days of dating, Clarissa sometimes teased him, "You act like you own the universe." Donovan would smirk, replying, "Maybe I intend to." That powerful combination of ambition and good looks was what had drawn Clarissa in. Yet, from the start, there were moments that gave her pause. Like the time Donovan casually mentioned that when people served no purpose, he saw no problem in discarding them. Or when he bragged about how he once sued a former business partner who dared to question his leadership in a major hotel renovation project, effectively bankrupting the man. She tried to rationalize these stories, telling herself it was business, not personal, that wealth came with cutthroat decisions. But somewhere deep inside, a gentle warning bell chimed. Those bells grew louder the day Clarissa discovered she was pregnant. It was only 6 months into their whirlwind romance, and the news came with a wave of shock and excitement. She had braced herself for Donovan's reaction, half expecting anger or demands to terminate the pregnancy. Instead, his face lit up in an expression of astonished joy. "A baby," he repeated softly, as if testing the word on his tongue. Then he wrapped her in his arms and promised, "I'll take care of everything. You and our child will never want for anything." That day, Clarissa believed she saw a glimmer of genuine love in Donovan's eyes, something that ran deeper than money. The next morning, Donovan surprised her by proposing with a ring that seemed to hold a small galaxy of diamonds. Within weeks, they married in an intimate ceremony at City Hall. She wore a simple white dress, while Donovan stuck to his tailored black suit. He insisted on a grand reception for his wealthy friends later, but the immediate wedding was for the two of them and the future they were about to create. Still, a quiet apprehension lingered. She worried about how Donovan's combative approach to life would translate to fatherhood. And as the first trimester wore on, Clarissa found that her once doting husband seemed to grow preoccupied. Long business meetings, secretive phone calls in the dead of night, and frequent late returns became the norm. Whenever she asked, Donovan brushed off her concerns with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Deals are complicated," he'd say. "Don't worry your pretty head about it. That's what my accountants and lawyers are for." The line between concern and paranoia blurred. To quell her doubts, Clarissa threw herself into reading everything about pregnancy, from baby names to nursery color schemes. She fantasized about the stable home she would create. In her mind, she envisioned Donovan eventually settling into fatherhood, forging a softer side that might outshine his ruthless business persona. After all, he was giving her a home, an expansive penthouse in a high-rise with breathtaking views of Lake Michigan. And though she still felt uneasy about his hush-hush business matters, Clarissa told herself she had no reason to question the man who had given her a storybook-like romance. As the second trimester approached, Clarissa felt her energy returning. The debilitating morning sickness finally subsided, and her hopes soared. Donovan seemed to sense her brighter moods. One evening, when he came home to the penthouse, he offered an unexpected gift: plane tickets to Turks and Caicos. "Think of it as a baby moon," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We need some time away, just the two of us. Let's enjoy a slice of paradise before we're knee-deep in diapers." Clarissa's initial joy was immediate and unbridled. Warm, sandy beaches, turquoise waters, and the chance to reconnect seemed like the perfect remedy for the growing distance between them. He described private villas and candlelit dinners under the stars. "We'll stay at a stunning beach resort," Donovan boasted. Nothing but the best for my wife and child. She believed him wholeheartedly. Why wouldn't she? This was exactly the romantic gesture she had dreamed about. Yet, with each passing day leading up to the trip, tiny cracks in Donovan's stories began to show. Clarissa overheard him on the phone at odd hours, his voice tense, spitting out words like cut losses, offshore accounts, and dispose of the shares. She wasn't well versed in high-stakes finance, but she recognized enough to know Donovan was in trouble. One evening, as she quietly made her way to the living room, she caught the tail end of a conversation. Donovan had been pacing, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm telling you, we have to move before the regulators get involved," he said in a low, dangerous tone. "If anyone asks about me, you've never heard of me. The name Blackwood doesn't exist in your books." When Donovan noticed Clarissa by the doorway, his expression shifted instantly to a forced grin. She asked if everything was all right. "Just some complicated business dealings," he said, pulling her closer. "Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart, I promise." He kissed her forehead, and she tried to believe him, if only to keep her own peace of mind. But late that night, Clarissa's gut continued to churn with unease. As she lay in bed, listening to the gentle hum of the city lights outside, she felt a knot form in her stomach, an intangible sense that something was terribly off. A small voice in her head told her to be cautious, to ask questions, to protect herself and her unborn child. Yet love and hope overshadowed any real inclination to confront Donovan directly. She reasoned that if the baby was making him more nervous, maybe it was just the weight of additional responsibilities. Possibly he was overextending himself financially in a quest to secure their family's future. In the morning, Donovan was especially affectionate, complimenting her glow, cooking her breakfast, offering to schedule a prenatal massage. His mood swings were so sharp and unpredictable, Clarissa didn't know which side of her husband she would encounter at any given moment. Yet, the tickets to Turks and Caicos remained pinned to the refrigerator door, a sparkling promise of sun and serenity. Despite the undercurrents of tension, Clarissa packed her suitcase with airy dresses and swimsuits that could accommodate her growing belly. She looked at herself in the mirror, hand resting on her unborn child, and whispered a quiet prayer, "Let this trip bring us closer." What she couldn't have known was that Donovan had orchestrated a plan that would do precisely the opposite. The illusions in their marriage ran far deeper than she had imagined. And soon, Clarissa would stand on a shore, not of her dreams, but of her most harrowing nightmare. The flight to Turks and Caicos initially felt like a dream. Donovan had booked first-class seats, where flight attendants fussed over them, ensuring Clarissa had extra blankets and snacks fit for her cravings. She felt a calm wash over her as she looked at Donovan, who was scanning through a business magazine. There was something intimate in the way he occasionally squeezed her hand, reminding her of the simpler times when they laughed over silly jokes and shared midnight hamburgers in bed. The arrival at the airport, the breezy Caribbean air, and the short drive to the resort all seemed to reaffirm that perhaps Donovan was just dealing with standard high-level business stress. After all, not many men would bring their pregnant wives to an island paradise if they were truly planning something sinister, right? Clarissa clung to these reassurances as their driver took them through palm-lined roads, the turquoise ocean peeking at them between tall coconut trees. They arrived at the luxury resort with a grand entrance of tropical flowers and fountains. Donovan's name was recognized immediately at the check-in desk. He had apparently paid for the best ocean view suite. The staff welcomed them with chilled fruit juice and a warm greeting stating, "We've been expecting you, Mr. Blackwood. Your special request is all arranged." Clarissa felt a spark of excitement bubble in her chest. A special request. Maybe Donovan had organized something romantic to celebrate their upcoming child. The suite was every bit as exquisite as advertised, with a large terrace that showcased the endless horizon of aquamarine water. Donovan personally walked Clarissa to the bedroom, helped her unpack, and lavished her with soft kisses on her forehead. Over dinner at the resort's waterfront restaurant, he seemed more relaxed than he had in weeks. They talked about baby names. Clarissa liked Ava for a girl, and Donovan grinned in approval. "It's simple but strong," he remarked, swirling his glass of imported red wine. After dinner, they strolled along the moonlit shoreline, Clarissa's bare feet sinking into the soft sand. Donovan had never looked so tranquil, and she found herself lulled by the rhythm of the waves. She imagined a future of family vacations, their child running up and down these very beaches with laughter echoing under the sun. In that moment, she believed wholeheartedly that Donovan was indeed trying to mend whatever cracks had formed in their relationship. A sense of peace settled over her, as gentle as the night breeze. But that night, while Clarissa slept, Donovan stood on the balcony, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, urgent. He couldn't risk Clarissa overhearing this particular call. "Make sure everything is set up," he whispered sharply. "I'm not coming back until it's done. And remember, if anyone asks, you haven't heard from me since Monday." There was a pause. Donovan's expression hardened. "Yes, I'm serious. No slip-ups. If I find out you messed up, you'll regret it." He ended the call, exhaling a shaky breath. The next morning brought a new sense of tension. Donovan insisted he had a business call that needed privacy, so he left Clarissa at the breakfast buffet alone. She dismissed her apprehension and tried to soak in the island's serenity, indulging in tropical fruit while her baby fluttered in her belly. A few times, she glanced at the couples around her, wishing Donovan would show up with that laid-back smile from the previous night. But after nearly an hour, she realized he wasn't returning. Clarissa found him in the suite, pacing near the balcony. At her questioning look, he forced a smile. "I'm sorry," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Had to settle some last-minute things. Let's enjoy today together, no distractions." Relieved, she agreed. They spent the afternoon snorkeling in shallow waters, Donovan fussing like a worried parent when Clarissa waded in with her buoyant belly. They built sandcastles, giggling like children when the waves collapsed their towers. Each time she felt the baby move, she tapped Donovan's arm. "Feel that?" she'd ask, eyes bright with excitement. He nodded, placing his hand gently on her stomach. For a moment, it felt like they were two kids on summer vacation, no secrets, no business calls, no stress. If Clarissa had looked more closely, though, she'd have noticed Donovan's eyes darting around the beach, scanning the crowds, almost as if anticipating someone or something. She might have noticed his phone vibrating incessantly in the pocket of his swim trunks. But she was far too lost in her dreams, in the tenderness of the day, to sense the ominous clouds gathering just beyond the horizon. Everything was about to change. On the third day of their stay, Donovan made an announcement. He had booked a private boating trip for the two of them. Clarissa, charmed by his continued thoughtfulness, eagerly prepared for an adventure on the shimmering sea. She dressed in a flowy maternity swimsuit cover-up, her sun hat tilted just enough to shield her face. Donovan appeared by her side, dashing in a pair of linen trousers and a crisp shirt. They boarded a sleek yacht that was waiting at the resort's pier, captained by a friendly local named Rohan, who greeted them with a wide smile. The first few hours were pure bliss. The yacht glided over crystal-clear waters as Clarissa marveled at colorful fish darting beneath the surface. Donovan seemed unusually introspective, sipping water silently instead of his usual wine. At one point, Clarissa teased him about being so quiet. He only responded with a non-committal shrug, forcing a faint smile. Eventually, they docked near a secluded strip of beach on a neighboring island. It was a hidden paradise, soft white sand, lush greenery, and not another soul in sight. Donovan suggested they go for a short walk to explore. Clarissa happily agreed. Rohan said he would wait at the boat, so the couple set off under the gentle sun. The island was breathtakingly peaceful, the sound of lapping waves and the rustling of palm leaves forming a soothing melody. Clarissa found a pretty conch shell near the shore and held it up to her ear, laughing when Donovan insisted on hearing the ocean's heartbeat inside it. Her laughter died, however, when Donovan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and a flicker of panic crossed his face. Need to make a call," he said. Without explanation, he stepped away, disappearing into the thick palm trees. Clarissa waited, hugging the shell against her chest. Minutes passed, then 10, then 20. A sense of unease unfurled in her stomach, overshadowing her earlier delight. Donovan never took this long, and they were literally on a deserted beach. She found him farther inland, crouched behind some foliage, phone pressed to his ear as he hissed angry words at the person on the other end. Clarissa couldn't catch everything, but she heard enough fragments to make her heart pound. "No, I told you, offshore accounts are compromised. Why didn't you move it sooner?" Donovan's voice trembled with rage. "Look, I can't come back right now. Handle it, or I swear you'll regret it." The conversation ended abruptly as he sensed her presence. He spun around, eyes dark with frustration. For a heartbeat, Clarissa felt terrified of her own husband. She managed to shaky question Donovan. "What's going on?" He inhaled, seeming to wrestle with 1,000 excuses. "Nothing you need to worry about," he finally snapped, too harshly. But in an instant, he softened his tone, forcing a half smile. "I'm sorry, love. Let's just head back to the boat." As they walked, Clarissa felt a tension coil around them like a serpent. When they reached the shore, the boat was gone. Panicked, Clarissa looked around for Rohan or any sign of the yacht's presence. Nothing. The waves lapped at empty sand where the boat should have been anchored. "He said he'd be waiting," Clarissa muttered in confusion. Donovan's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Maybe he had engine trouble," he suggested, scanning the empty horizon. They waited. 10 minutes, 20, 30. The sun beat down on them, scorching. Clarissa's throat felt parched, and her baby kicked uneasily. Donovan fidgeted with his phone, cursing under his breath. Finally, he said, "The signal here is weak. Let me see if I can find a better spot." Clarissa watched as he ventured inland again, phone held high. She assumed he was trying to call the resort or Rohan. Time dragged on. Clarissa called out, "Donovan?" No answer. Her heart hammered in her chest. The sound of the ocean suddenly felt ominous, as though it was mocking her. She stood and marched back into the palm trees, determined to find him, but Donovan was nowhere in sight. Just as panic was about to take over, her phone rang his number. She snatched it up. "Donovan, where are you?" For a moment, all she heard was the roar of wind. Then Donovan's voice crackled on the other end, distant and cold. "I'm sorry, Clarissa," he said, not sounding sorry in the least. "I had to go." She froze. "Go? What do you mean you had to go? Where are you?" A pause. Then his voice returned, heavy as lead. "I can't explain now. You'll be all right. Someone will find you eventually. I left some supplies further up the beach." Her mind reeled, refusing to process his words. "Donovan, this isn't funny. Come back." "I'm pregnant. Your child is here too." She shouted the last sentence, tears burning the back of her eyes. But Donovan was gone. The call ended with a soft click, leaving Clarissa surrounded by the hiss of static. She sank to her knees, phone clutched in her hand, heart thrashing like a wounded animal. On that deserted beach, as waves gently erased footprints in the sand, Clarissa realized her nightmare had only just begun. Clarissa's first instinct was disbelief. This had to be some cruel joke, a test of her resilience, some bizarre challenge Donovan had concocted. But as the day stretched on and no boat appeared, reality bore down on her with suffocating weight. She was alone, pregnant, and stranded on an unfamiliar island. No sign of rescue, no sign of Donovan. Trying to remain calm, Clarissa combed the shoreline, searching for any supplies Donovan might have mentioned. Eventually, she discovered a small stash, a single bottle of water, a can of peaches, and a tarp stuffed into a plastic bin near some boulders. The discovery provided minimal relief. The supplies were woefully insufficient for a prolonged stay. It was as though Donovan had left just enough for her to survive a day or two, but not much longer. Her body trembled with terror and betrayal. She shouted Donovan's name until her throat was raw, tears stinging her eyes. Gradually, fear transformed into anger, fueling her determination to stay alive for the sake of her unborn child. She forced herself to drink water sparingly and ration the peaches, even though hunger gnawed at her with relentless urgency. By sunset, Clarissa realized she needed shelter. The island might have hidden dangers, unknown wildlife, insects, or the threat of a sudden storm. She used the tarp to create a makeshift lean to against a cluster of rocks. The process exhausted her physically, and she sank onto the sand when she was done, one hand supporting her aching lower back, the other protectively over her belly. Darkness enveloped her, punctuated only by the distant glow of moonlight on the water. Each gust of wind sounded like a whisper of Donovan's name, haunting her in the night. She barely slept, torn between fear of the unknown and overwhelming sorrow. Memories flickered through her mind. Donovan's warm smile, his romantic gestures, the tender moments they had shared. How could he do this to me? To our child, she wondered in silent agony. The waves offered no solace, lapping gently against the shore like an eternal reminder of the passage of time. Morning arrived with a ruthless brightness, and Clarissa forced herself to think clearly. She needed to find water and a way to signal for help. Gathering her courage, she ventured along the island's perimeter, hoping to find a stream or a lagoon. The heat pressed down on her, intensifying her fatigue. Twice she nearly fainted, the edges of her vision going black from exertion and dehydration. But each time she steadied herself, rubbing her belly as if to remind herself that she was not alone, that she had a life inside her, depending on her willpower. Eventually she stumbled upon a small freshwater spring, trickling from rocky outcroppings deeper inland. Relief flooded her, and she refilled her single bottle. Over the next few hours, she dragged driftwood from the beach and arranged it in a giant help sign on the sand. As the sun rose higher, she positioned shards of reflective shell and broken glass near her message, hoping to catch the eye of any passing plane or boat. Her phone was useless, no signal, no battery left. By noon, the dryness in her mouth returned, and she had to venture back to the spring. With each passing minute, Clarissa's anger at Donovan grew, hardening into a protective shell around her heart. In the suffocating heat, it became impossible to cry. Rage and survival instinct overshadowed grief. She vowed that if she ever made it off this forsaken patch of land, she would make him pay. While Clarissa clung to life on the deserted island, Donovan's plan was well underway. He had hopped onto another vessel that had been waiting on the far side of the island, an inflatable boat manned by a private associate. From there, he made his way to a small airstrip on a neighboring isle, where a charter plane took him out of the Caribbean entirely. Even he couldn't believe how smoothly it had all gone. Months of orchestrating shady deals had reached a boiling point, forcing Donovan to take drastic action. He was under investigation for financial crimes, money laundering, fraudulent investments, and multiple counts of embezzlement. Much of his empire was built on illusions, untraceable accounts, and an army of shell corporations. The imminent crackdown threatened not just his business, but also his personal assets. He risked jail time, the freezing of his accounts, and total ruin of the public persona he held so dear. Abandoning Clarissa on that beach wasn't just a twisted ploy to escape fatherhood, it was a calculated move in Donovan's eyes. He believed that leaving her behind would buy him time, ensuring she wouldn't interfere with his plans or inadvertently lead the authorities to him. With Clarissa out of the way, Donovan could focus on salvaging whatever fortune remained and disappear, re-emerging under a different name in a different country. Sitting in the private plane's luxurious seat, Donovan allowed himself a single moment of regret. He remembered the day he found out Clarissa was pregnant, how a part of him felt genuine happiness. But business, money, and personal ambition had always been his true masters. In the end, he convinced himself that Clarissa would be rescued eventually. Maybe she'd hate him forever, but at least he'd be free of the burdens and scrutiny that threatened to destroy him. Meanwhile, Clarissa's reality was a far cry from the comforts of Donovan's private flight. Day after day, she battled hunger, thirst, and the sweltering tropical sun. Nights brought their own terrors, the rustling of unknown creatures in the underbrush, the relentless buzzing of insects. Despite her makeshift shelter, she couldn't block out the fear of what might be lurking in the dark. A single scorpion or venomous snake could end everything. Her exhaustion grew more profound by the hour, but she refused to give up. She talked to her unborn child, promising they would survive. She started making daily checks around the island's perimeter, hoping to see a boat or plane. One evening, the sky grew dark and stormy, and she feared a tropical thunderstorm would tear through her flimsy shelter. She hastily reinforced it with more branches and prayed the wind wouldn't sweep it away. The storm raged, pelting her with rain so fierce it left bruises on her arms. Yet a strange gratitude welled up inside her. The rainwater gave her a chance to collect extra water in large leaves, staving off dehydration for a bit longer. As the days wore on, Clarissa's belly continued to grow, a constant reminder that time was running out. She didn't even know what day it was anymore. Her phone was dead, and the daily cycle of scorching sun followed by star-filled nights blurred into an endless loop of survival. Each morning she woke up, stunned that she was still alive, clinging to the unwavering hope that somehow, some way, she and her unborn child would be saved. Fate, however, has a strange way of intervening when hope seems lost. On the 5th day of Clarissa's ordeal, though it felt more like the 50th, she caught sight of a small fishing boat on the horizon. Her heart lurched with disbelief, then soared with desperate hope. She dashed to her help sign, waving her arms madly, ignoring the dryness in her throat and the dizzying swirl of heat in her head. For a moment, it seemed the boat didn't notice. Panic gripped her, and she shouted until her voice cracked. Then, by some miracle, the boat changed course. Several agonizing minutes passed as it approached, revealing 2 fishermen on board, a father and son from a neighboring island who had strayed off their usual course in search of a better catch. They spotted Clarissa's frantic signals and anchored just offshore. The father, Paul, waded through the shallow water to reach her, concern etched into his sun-browned face. "Miss, are you okay?" he asked, voice trembling with shock at her disheveled appearance. The relief that flooded Clarissa was so overwhelming that she nearly collapsed in his arms. "Help me," she managed, tears finally flowing after days of dryness. "I'm pregnant. I've been stranded." Within minutes, Paul and his son, Miguel, escorted Clarissa onto their boat, offering her fresh water and some dried fish. She gulped the water greedily, weeping with gratitude. Paul carefully asked how she ended up alone. Clarissa hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Could she really tell them her husband had abandoned her? But her exhaustion won out, and the words spilled out like a flood: her husband's name. Donovan Blackwood, the vacation that turned into a nightmare, how she'd been left to fend for herself on a deserted beach. Paul and Miguel exchanged glances. "Blackwood?" Miguel repeated. "I think I've heard that name before. Some big businessman." Clarissa felt shame burn inside her. She was the wife of that big businessman, the man who left her to die. Tears stained her cheeks as she nodded. Paul laid a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, you're safe now. They brought her to their own island, smaller and far less affluent than the resort destination. There they lived in a modest wooden house near the shoreline with Paul's wife, Carmen. Despite having little, they treated Clarissa with warmth and compassion, offering her a clean bed to rest and a homemade broth to replenish her strength. Over the next few days, Carmen nursed Clarissa through dehydration and potential infection from cuts and scrapes she'd sustained. A local midwife was called to check on the baby's health, ensuring that Clarissa's ordeal hadn't caused irreversible harm. By some miracle, the heartbeat was strong, affirming that the child was still thriving. As Clarissa recovered, she grappled with a swirl of emotions: relief at being rescued, anger at Donovan, and a fiery determination to seek answers. She told the family bits of her story, though they never pried for more information than she was ready to share. She learned that Paul didn't have much money, but he did have a friend on the main island who owned a small catamaran. Perhaps that friend could take Clarissa to the nearest hospital or help her connect with someone back in Chicago. Grateful beyond words, Clarissa offered to pay them back once she sorted out her own finances. A flicker of shame crossed her face. She had no idea how much of Donovan's money was actually legitimate, or whether she even had access to any bank accounts. Nevertheless, Paul waved off her concerns with a gentle smile. "We help each other here," he said. "That's what people do." Clarissa felt tears welling up. The kindness of these strangers stood in stark contrast to the cruelty she had endured. In her heart, she vowed to repay their generosity 1,000-fold. But first, she had to face the reality that Donovan was gone and that she needed to pick up the pieces of her life without him. One thought burned brightest in her mind: Donovan would not get away with what he had done. Through Paul's connections, Clarissa secured a boat to the nearest town with a functional clinic and a decent Wi-Fi connection. Her first stop was a small medical center where a doctor confirmed that, aside from dehydration and stress, both she and the baby were in stable condition. It was a relief so profound that Clarissa cried tears of gratitude right in the examination room. The doctor advised her to rest and take prenatal vitamins, but otherwise gave her the green light to travel. When she finally gained access to the internet, Clarissa's world tilted on its axis. News articles and financial headlines about Donovan Blackwood's massive scandal were plastered everywhere. Millionaire mogul under investigation for fraud, Blackwood disappears amidst criminal probe, and more. She scoured each piece of information, feeling her stomach twist into knots. The timeline indicated Donovan had fled the mainland just days before the authorities planned to seize his assets. Her heart pounded with both fury and fear. Where had he gone? Had he planned to vanish all along? One article mentioned a rumor that Donovan might be seeking refuge in an undisclosed location outside the United States. Some speculated he had used private jets to hop between countries without an extradition treaty. Clarissa clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. So this was what he'd been hiding. The baby moon was a lie, a convenient way to abandon her, and likely to secure his own escape route. Now came the real test. She contacted her parents, who were shocked and frantic after not hearing from her for so long. Through choked sobs, Clarissa explained the situation in broad strokes, promising she was safe and would return to Chicago soon. She refrained from delving into Donovan's abandonment, only hinting that there had been a horrible incident. Her father insisted on wiring her money for a plane ticket home, but Clarissa hesitated. She still wore the ring Donovan had given her, a ring rumored to cost more than a brand new luxury car. She felt torn. Should she sell it for the money to get back home, or keep it as evidence of the life she once had? In the end, she relented. She needed to get home quickly and sort out the legal nightmare Donovan had created. Within 2 days, Clarissa was on a flight back to the United States, heart pounding with anticipation and dread. Landing in Chicago felt surreal. The city skyline greeted her like an old friend she hadn't expected to see again. She limped out of the airport with a borrowed suitcase, wearing clothes donated by Carmen and Paul. Exhaustion weighed on her, but she knew she couldn't rest yet. She headed straight to the penthouse, uncertain if it had already been seized by the authorities. To her surprise, the building's doorman recognized her and let her in without issue. The elevator ride up to the top floor felt interminable, and when she stepped into the penthouse, she was met with an eerie stillness. The once vibrant space that Donovan had filled with expensive art and custom furniture now looked like a mausoleum of abandoned dreams. Clarissa wandered through the rooms in a haze, discovering scattered documents, empty closets, and a lingering sense of betrayal. That evening, she contacted a lawyer, a family friend who agreed to handle her case pro bono until she could stabilize her finances. He informed her of Donovan's criminal charges, the warrants out for his arrest, and the possibility that Clarissa herself might be tangled in legal scrutiny if the authorities suspected she was complicit in any financial wrongdoing. With trembling fingers, she provided the lawyer all the evidence. She had texts, emails, her recollection of Donovan's shady phone calls, and, most crucially, the fact that he had left her to fend for herself on a deserted beach. This wasn't just about clearing her name, it was about holding Donovan accountable for his cruelty. The lawyer assured her that, while the desertion might fall under a different jurisdiction, the sheer weight of Donovan's criminal activities could strengthen her civil case. Worn out from fear and anger, Clarissa curled up on the penthouse bed, hugging her belly. She promised her unborn child that she would fight with every ounce of strength she had. She wouldn't let Donovan's betrayal define their future. Days turned into weeks, and Clarissa found herself under the relentless spotlight of the media. Word had leaked that Donovan's pregnant wife had returned to Chicago under mysterious circumstances. Journalists camped outside the penthouse, buzzing like vultures, hoping for a headline. The rumor mills churned with theories. Some speculated Clarissa was in on Donovan's schemes. Others portrayed her as a tragic victim of a heartless mogul. Desperate to clear her name and find any clue of Donovan's whereabouts, Clarissa agreed to a carefully managed interview on a reputable news channel. Seated in a studio under bright lights, her pregnant belly evident beneath a loose-fitting dress, she recounted her story with raw honesty, how she'd been lured to Turks and Caicos under the guise of a baby moon, only to be left stranded, how local fishermen saved her life, and how she discovered Donovan's criminal empire upon returning. The interview went viral, garnering sympathy from the public. In the aftermath, Clarissa was inundated with messages, some supportive, some cynical. But one message stood out, an anonymous tip claiming to know Donovan's location. The cryptic email read, "I have information on Donovan Blackwood. He's in an undisclosed property overseas. If you want details, meet me alone." The email included a date, time, and the address of a small cafe in downtown Chicago. Clarissa's lawyer warned her against going. "This could be a trap," he cautioned. "It might be blackmail, or worse, Donovan might be luring you somewhere." Clarissa felt a swirl of fear, but also an unyielding drive to discover the truth. If there was a chance to locate Donovan and ensure he answered for his crimes, she had to try. On a cool, drizzly morning, Clarissa arrived at the designated cafe. She wore a hooded coat to avoid recognition, her heart pounding as she scanned the tables. A woman with short, dark hair beckoned her over. She introduced herself as Lucia, explaining she was a former accountant for one of Donovan's shell corporations. "I couldn't watch him get away with this," Lucia said, her voice quivering. She slid a USB drive across the table. "This has bank statements, transaction records, evidence of where he moved his money. I believe he's hiding out on a private estate in Montenegro. I tracked several large wire transfers to that location. Clarissa stared at the USB, her pulse racing. This was the break she'd been hoping for. With such evidence, international authorities could have a strong lead. Lucia warned her, Donovan has powerful connections. He'll keep paying people off as long as he can. If you want him brought to justice, make sure the FBI or Interpol gets this. And be careful. When Clarissa asked why Lucia was doing this, the woman's gaze flickered with guilt. I helped build his empire, unknowingly at first, then knowingly out of fear. I can't live with the guilt anymore. He ruined so many lives. I heard your interview. I realized he nearly took your life too. Clarissa thanked Lucia, ensuring her anonymity would be protected. Walking out of the cafe, Clarissa clutched the USB drive with trembling hands. The next step was clear. She had to hand over the evidence to the authorities. But part of her ached for direct confrontation, to look Donovan in the eye and demand an explanation. The memory of being marooned on that beach, her tears mixing with salt water, ignited a fury within her that refused to fade. By her 7th month of pregnancy, Clarissa felt overwhelmed but determined. Her lawyer used the evidence from Lucia's USB to involve the FBI and Interpol in a wide-scale manhunt for Donovan. Despite lingering nightmares of the island, she found courage by focusing on the baby's future. Selling Donovan's extravagant gifts paid off her debts and allowed her to repay Paul and Carmen for their life-saving kindness. Meanwhile, weekly prenatal classes offered a glimpse of normalcy. Sharing experiences with other expectant mothers gave her renewed strength. Then, a letter arrived from Donovan's estranged sister, Elaine, who begged to meet. Over coffee, Elaine revealed Donovan's long history of forging family financial records and intimidating anyone who challenged him. She was horrified by his cruelty toward Clarissa and offered to testify against him. Their conversation brought Clarissa both sorrow and validation. Donovan's treachery ran deeper than she'd imagined, but now she had an even stronger ally. Determined to protect others from his ruthless schemes and to free herself from his shadow, Clarissa pressed forward, one hopeful day at a time. As Clarissa entered her 8th month, the authorities finally confirmed they had traced Donovan to a private villa on the coast of Montenegro. The estate was guarded, and rumors suggested Donovan had locals on his payroll. An arrest wasn't imminent unless the US worked out an extradition plan. The FBI contacted Clarissa's lawyer, stating that if she provided a signed affidavit detailing Donovan's abandonment, it might bolster their case by showcasing his disregard for human life. Clarissa didn't hesitate. She recounted everything: the deserted beach, the overheard phone calls, the fisherman who rescued her. Days later, she got the news. Donovan had been arrested by local law enforcement acting on Interpol's warrant. He was found attempting to bribe officials to smuggle him out of Montenegro by boat. Clarissa's heart pounded as she listened to the FBI agent's phone call. The man who had inflicted so much pain was finally in custody. She felt a wave of relief so powerful it brought her to her knees. Tears poured down her cheeks as she murmured a quiet thank you to whatever forces in the universe had aligned to make this happen. But the journey wasn't over. Donovan would face trial, and Clarissa, along with many of his former associates, would likely be called to testify. Through her lawyer, she learned that Donovan was livid in custody, claiming Clarissa set him up and that she was no better than him. The absurdity of his accusation made her laugh bitterly. He still thinks he can manipulate the narrative, she thought, but for the first time she felt confident that his lies would not stand against the mountain of evidence. The public's fascination with the case skyrocketed. Media outlets camped outside the courthouse, eager for a statement. Clarissa, however, maintained her privacy, giving only one brief press release through her lawyer. She wanted the world to know that justice was being served, but she refused to feed the sensationalism. Her focus was on her baby. Among the avalanche of media frenzy, A single letter arrived at Clarissa's doorstep, a scrawl of Donovan's handwriting. It had no return address. With trembling hands, she opened it. "Clarissa, the first know you hate me, but I promise I never intended for you to die. I had to leave you behind because the authorities were closing in. I thought you'd be rescued quickly. I did what I had to do to survive. None of the allegations about me are fully true. They're twisting things. If you care about me, you'll tell them the truth." Donovan, she read the letter twice, fury mingling with a strange sorrow. He hadn't even apologized, he was merely grasping at straws to save himself. Clarissa placed the letter in an envelope and handed it to her lawyer the next morning. It was more evidence of Donovan's manipulative tactics. She felt no urge to respond. Her life was no longer tethered to Donovan's illusions. By the time Donovan's trial began, Clarissa was 9 months pregnant and visibly exhausted. Yet she stood firm, determined to tell her story. In a packed courtroom, she described how her husband had abandoned her on a deserted beach, forcing her to fight for her life and the life of their unborn child. Other witnesses, former employees, betrayed business partners, and forensic accountants presented a damning catalogue of Donovan's crimes: offshore accounts, forged documents, and systematic fraud. The prosecution painted a portrait of a man willing to destroy anyone who got in his way, including his own wife. Sitting across the room, Donovan looked disheveled, a far cry from the polished mogul who once charmed every room. When Clarissa locked eyes with him, she felt neither pity nor satisfaction, only a somber recognition of the broken man he had become. After days of testimony, the jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict. Donovan was sentenced to a long prison term with little chance of early release. As the judge read the decision, Clarissa experienced a curious mix of relief and sadness. This man was still the father of her child, but she couldn't deny the justice he faced. Walking out of the courthouse, Clarissa felt lighter, as though a long, dark chapter of her life had finally closed. She brushed aside the media frenzy, focused on only one thing: protecting the peaceful future awaiting her and her baby. Within a week of the verdict, Clarissa went into labor. She was rushed to the hospital at dawn, her mind spinning with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The pains were intense, but she channeled her determination, remembering everything she had endured. Hour after hour, she pushed through contractions that felt like they would tear her apart. Finally, with a final burst of strength, her baby's cries filled the delivery room. "A girl," the doctor announced, gently placing the infant on Clarissa's chest. Tears streamed down Clarissa's cheeks as she cradled her daughter, the child she had protected all those months. She named her Ava, just as she'd once planned with Donovan, only now the name symbolized new beginnings, free of his influence. News of Ava's birth reached the media, and Clarissa received an outpouring of well wishes from strangers who had followed her harrowing story. Meanwhile, Donovan's sentencing date approached. Clarissa didn't attend. She had no desire to witness his continued attempts at denial or pleas for leniency. Her lawyer informed her that he received 20 years, with the possibility of parole after serving 2/3. Even then, there were other lawsuits pending, further sentencing that could keep him locked away for much longer. In the penthouse she had once shared with Donovan, Clarissa packed up her belongings, determined to build a simpler life for herself and Ava. By selling off the property, she covered her expenses and donated a substantial sum to various charities, including the one in Turks and Caicos that had funded the fishermen's community. The building staff wished her well with genuine fondness, having seen her transition from a shy newcomer to a resilient woman. On the day she handed over the penthouse keys, she paused to reflect. The skyline sparkled under the afternoon sun, a view she once thought of as the pinnacle of success. Now, it was just a backdrop for memories, some cherished, many painful. She whispered a silent goodbye to the opulent life she once believed was her happily ever after. Months passed, and Clarissa found a cozy apartment in a quieter part of Chicago. Far from the glamour of downtown high-rises, she found solace in tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors who cooed over baby Ava. She took a job working part-time at a non-profit organization that advocated for women's rights, something that gave her a sense of purpose. She dedicated her spare time to motherhood, reveling in every milestone from Ava's first smile to her first tentative steps. Occasionally, the media still tried to contact Clarissa, hoping for an exclusive story or an update on how she felt about Donovan rotting in prison. She declined politely every time. The chapters of that life were closed. Her focus now was on building a future founded on sincerity, love, and moral conviction, the very things Donovan had lacked. Donovan's name still popped up in headlines whenever new lawsuits emerged. Clarissa glanced at them only briefly, reminding herself of how far she had come from the naive woman who fell for his facade. Each time, she felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. That chapter was over, but it had come at such a steep cost. Sometimes, late at night, she would stare at Ava, sleeping peacefully, lulled by the hush of a lullaby. A lingering question haunted her. What will I tell my daughter about her father one day? For now, she decided Ava needed to grow without the shadow of Donovan's misdeeds. There would come a time for that conversation, but it was not now. Love, safety, and hope were the only things Clarissa wanted for her daughter's life. And so, she pressed forward warmer and stronger than she had ever been. Years later, Clarissa stood on a stage at a charity gala, this one supporting single mothers and survivors of domestic and financial abuse. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pinned back, and a serene smile on her lips. Little Ava, now a spirited toddler, was in the audience with Clarissa's parents, clapping her tiny hands together whenever she saw her mother. Taking the microphone, Clarissa spoke with heartfelt conviction. She shared a distilled version of her story, not for sympathy, but to illuminate the resilience that can emerge from the darkest places. She talked about how one betrayal sparked her mission to ensure no woman or mother would be left helpless at the whim of another's greed. The audience listened, spellbound by her honesty and grace. After her speech, Clarissa stepped down from the stage to a standing ovation. Dozens of attendees approached, shaking her hand, some with tears in their eyes. She recognized the look hope in the face of adversity. She realized her greatest triumph wasn't in surviving Donovan's cruelty, or even seeing him jailed, but in transcending the pain to build a life that lifted others. In a far-off prison cell, Donovan Blackwood served his time. Some said he'd grown bitter, blaming the world for his downfall. Others claimed he had glimpses of remorse. Clarissa never sought confirmation. Her life had moved on, blossoming into something resilient and free. At night, when she tucked Ava into bed in their modest, cozy home, Clarissa would say a silent prayer. Not a prayer of regret or bitterness, but of gratitude. Gratitude for her daughter's health, for the kindness of strangers who saved her life, for the second chance she'd been given, for the truth that once left her broken but ultimately set her free. And in those quiet moments, she believed wholeheartedly in the power of karma. The man who once had everything lost it all because of his own cruelty, while the woman he tried to discard discovered a strength that would guide her for the rest of her days. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster tale of betrayal and redemption. Clarissa's journey reminds us all that true power doesn't come from wealth or status. It emerges from courage, compassion, and resilience when faced with life's darkest moments. If you found inspiration in her story of survival against all odds, please take a moment to support this channel. A simple click liking, sharing, or subscribing goes a long way in helping more people discover these powerful narratives. Your engagement not only encourages us to continue bringing you stories that resonate with the human spirit, but also builds a community where we can learn and grow together. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. And remember, no matter how desperate the situation, hope and determination can light the path to a new beginning. Thank you for watching, and stay inspired